Hey everyone, my name is Ryan Becker. Thank you for checking this video out. Welcome to part one of how I edit my podcasts. Now, I host 4 different podcasts and I don't edit all of them, but for the ones I do, I'm going to take you through all of the things that I have learned over the years in producing over 200 podcast episodes for various shows, as well as teaching others how to edit as well. I'm not a professional. I was not, officially trained in this. I didn't go to school for this. But my goal with this is to show you that editing your podcast to a quality of audio that is listenable, that is good, that for most people they won't be able to tell a difference. It is very accessible to you and to me who aren't professionals in this, but have picked up podcasting as something that either aligns with our career or something that aligns just with our hobbies and our passions. And so I'm going to take you through all of this. I do have a full 2-hour webinar on how to create and launch a podcast that explains everything from content and purpose all the way through publishing and hosting, explaining equipment, microphones, audio interfaces, the whole shebang. And if you want to check that out, there's going to be a link in the description, as well as you can head over to www.absurdnetwork.com/webinar and you can check that out. Without further ado, here we go. So what you're looking at is Adobe Audition. I'm using Adobe Audition CC 2020 Creative Cloud. If you are using Adobe Audition Master Collection, which I believe the last version was 2016, you will see a few differences, but nothing. One of the main things that I do in Adobe Creative Cloud is going to be different. And so you're going to need to look up specific tutorials for anything you're doing with Master Collection before it became Creative Cloud. So in part one, I'm going to be going over just the basics of what we're looking at and setting up our podcast to be edited. So part two is when we actually jump into editing. So when we look at Adobe Audition, what you're seeing here is this is where all of our tracks will go in our session file. So you're looking at a Adobe session file. When you create a new session file, it's actually going to create a new folder that contains everything that is going to go in that session. So if you record something new, if you add tracks, anything like that, all of that will get dumped into that new session folder. So we have a session folder opened up here. We have a session opened up here, and up here in the top left, you've got the files. These are files that I've literally dragged and dropped from my Explorer window, but if you're using a Mac, then it would be your Finder window. You can drag and drop, or you can choose to import them by clicking this symbol or pressing Control-I. Down here, I'm actually going to select the effects rack. This is where all of the edits, all of the adjustments that I'm going to do in this view will go. Down here is the history tab. If I click any of these, it will undo all the way to that step. And then down here is our controls for recording, stopping, playing. And then at the bottom is our levels view. Our levels view is going to tell us how loud something is in decibels. So when you are getting started with your episode, the first thing you're going to want to do is begin to name your tracks. The reason being, if I record to track 1, then my file will be named track1_001. And if I stop and I record something else to that track, then it will be named track1_002. So it's going to continue that number progression for as many files as you record, the same for any track. So it's going to name whatever your recording is exactly what the name of the track is. So we're going to go to track 1, and I'm going to turn track 1 into my intro and outro track. This is where my music will go. For track 2, I'm going to change this to my own name. Now, if I was recording, I've already recorded these files that we're going to be working with, so not too worried about that right now. But I would typically I title them the initials of whatever podcast I'm working on, maybe the episode number or a description. If the episode doesn't have a number yet, then just a one word from the title. And we're working with A Beautiful Faith, and we're working with episode 11, and then I would put my name. And then for my guest, if I'm just dropping their track in, or if they're recording to my computer as well in person, then I would do that. Cool. These are the 3 tracks that we are going to be working with the entire time that we are here. We won't be working with track 4 or 5 because there's not any more that we need outside of just these 3 tracks. Now, up in the top left corner, you're going to see waveform and multi-track. So we're in multi-track view. These are all the multiple tracks that we're going to be working with. And there's two terms that you need to be very familiar with as we move forward. Number one is destructive editing. So destructive editing is basically editing that you cannot undo once you have saved the file. And in Adobe Audition, what you will notice is a little asterisk that appears next to whatever file has recently had changes made to it since the last time you saved. So if something is not saved, you will know because it has the asterisk next to it. As long as something remains unsaved in a destructive editor, then you can undo it. But the second you save it or close it, it's there permanently. With non-destructive editing, that means the edits can be undone. Ignore that. We'll get to that in another episode. But that does mean that the edits can be undone. The short of it is any edits done in multi-track view are virtually non-destructive. They can be undone at any point. You can come back to the file days later. You can close it, reopen it, and a year from now, you'll be able to undo anything that you have done and reset it. But anything done in waveform view, that's going to be permanent. That's going to be anything once you've saved it or closed the program, there is no undoing what you have done. Now, there are reasons for you to use the waveform editor and do destructive editing, and we're going to get into that. But for the most part, the most of your edits are going to be done in this view. So once you have your track and once you have all of your files there, now what I've done is I took a full hour-long episode and I've cut out about 6.5 minutes from each vocal track. That way, as we're going through the editing process, we won't have to wait on a timer for as long as it applies the setting to a file that is hundreds of megabytes in size. And so the first thing that I'm going to do, I'm actually going to leave the intro and outro alone for now, and I'm going to drag the first file onto the timeline, and I'm going to drag the second file onto the timeline directly underneath it. Now, once I click up here, this is my kind of view bar. All of that gray is what is the timeline, the portion of the timeline that I'm viewing. So if I drag in, it's going to zoom in to wherever this red play marker is. So once I see this, the first thing that you're going to want to do is line up your audio. So what you're looking at here is a waveform. This is the visual representation of the audio and the volume that is in your track. The bigger the peak, the louder the sound. The smaller the peak, the quieter the sound. Typically what you want to do is record a little bit quieter because it's easier to turn up in the editing process than it is to turn down. If something is too loud, there's no getting it back. So once we're here, and we have our audio lined up, and you just simply click and drag to where you remember it being, and you may want to listen through in order to make sure that everything is timed appropriately, then you'll be good to go. Now, before we end this video, we record a file. So what I've done is dragged files in here that are already ready to go as far as they need to be edited. But what about when you've just launched the program and you want to edit something? So the first thing that you're going to do is choose the track that you want to record to. Once you've chosen the track that you're wanting to record to, you're going to arm that track with this R button. You're going to arm the track for recording, and immediately you know a track is live because as you talk into the microphone, you will actually see it right here. You'll see the levels start to pop up. Then you're going to want to make sure that for your input device, the microphone that you are wanting to use and wanting to record is selected. So for me, I'm going to go to mono, which means it's only going to input one feed, versus a stereo recording will have both a left channel and a right channel. So this is actually the exact same. It's just duplicated between the left channel and the right channel so that when you hear it, it sounds like it's mono. So make sure you have the right input selected. I always suggest recording in mono for something like this at the kind of consumer level of podcasting, at the side hustle or hobby level of podcasting. It just makes life a little bit easier. If you are not armed for recording, when you press this button to record, nothing will happen. So your goal is to make sure that whatever track you want to record to is armed, and then you'll press record. Now, bear this in mind. Any other track that is not muted will play through your ears while you are recording, which is great if you're wanting to sing along to something or insert a phrase at a specific point. However, It's not great if you don't want to hear that, or if you're moving on to something else. So you have two options when it comes to recording while there are other tracks on your multi-track session. Number one is you can click the solo button. This will automatically mute or disable the other tracks. And once I unclick solo, it will reactivate them. The other option you have is you can click the M. The M button is mute. Very simple. Once those are muted and I hit record, I can start recording and I'll be good to go. And if I were to press record, it would absolutely start recording and name my file track 4. Now, there is one thing you're going to want to make sure that you do before you actually press record. This is incredibly important, which is you need to check your levels. This is an okay way to do it, but you're still guesstimating. So this little I button is called monitoring it's monitor input. It is what's going to let you hear yourself. You should check this only to make sure that what you're hearing, what Audition is capturing when you're recording is not distorted. There's no like loose connection or it doesn't sound staticky. But the other thing you're going to do is when you press this button, your voice will actually start to feed back to you. You can hear it right now, I'm sure. Now you notice that probably, if you heard that, it was probably really annoying. If I had headphones on, it would speech jam me and make it impossible for me to talk. You don't want to use the monitor input feature while you're actually recording because it is not. It has a high latency, which means that you'll hear yourself a little bit later. The reason that you want to use the monitor input is simply because it activates the levels window at the bottom. And when you're at the bottom, you're going to be able to see exactly what number of decibels, what decibel value you're recording at. Your goal when you're recording is to, when you're in this kind of normal talking volume, you want your voice to be somewhere between -21, -24 would be the lowest I would say, -24 and -12 decibels, in that 12 decibel range. You just want to see as you're talking that this bar kind of hovers in that area. As long as it does, you're good. This gives you a lot of headroom up here so that if you laugh or talk really loud, it won't peak past -0 or past 0, and then you lose whatever is louder than 0. So this is where you want to record at. So you're just going to turn on monitor input, talk for a little bit at the volume that you're likely going to talk at when you record, and then you're good. Remember that for most guests that are recording, they will likely start talking louder as soon as the recording actually starts. So just keep that in mind. You may have to turn it down slightly if you balance them to whatever they're doing during sound check. Once you've done that, your levels are good, you start recording, and you're off to the races. So that is the introduction just into the initial screens of Adobe Audition. So I hope that you've enjoyed this. In part 2, we're going to get into actually editing this and putting it all together as well. So stay tuned for part 2. Thank you for watching part 1. Make sure to head over to absurdnetwork.com/webinar for the full Podcasting 101 webinar, and we'll see you next time.